presentation, the last session was actually quite interesting. You actually saw a lot of interesting, exciting AI work on the ground, right? And you also looked at how DPI infrastructure can actually work with AI and bring to life a lot of AI use cases. In this panel conversation, we will actually delve deeper into this conversation. We will take a look at what is really happening on the ground as far as AI is concerned. We will look at how AI startups in the country are working with enterprises, and we will explore what is the landscape right now, what are AI startups doing in the country, and what are some challenges that AI startups are facing in the country. And joining me in this panel, in fact, this is a very stellar panel. We have a couple of VCs. We have industry veterans. We have Shripati. We have Shashank representing the VC world. You will hear the VC lens. You'll get to know about the VC lens as well. They are the ones who have been at the forefront of this revolution, AI revolution, technology revolution, and they have been speaking to a lot of startups. So you will hear from them as to what it means for AI startups to really scale and work with enterprises. And on my left, you have two wonderful startup founders. You have Madhav and you have Himanshu. In fact, they are the ones who are actually building AI for India and for the world. So you would definitely enjoy this conversation. So please wear your thinking hats on, and you can ask me questions. You can ask the panel questions at the end of the conversation. It would be great if you can wear your thinking hats on. So let's start the conversation. So my first question, and the first segment of the panel conversation would revolve around the overall AI landscape in India. So what is really happening on the ground? And for that, my first question will be to Shripati. Shripati, so as I said earlier, you are working with a lot of startups in India, including a lot of AI startups. Do you really see AI startups in India truly creating defensible moats? Is there some real action on the ground that you see? Or are these just like wrappers being created on top of LLMs, and there are no real use cases? What do you see in the Indian market?
The answer is a little bit of both, right? Like as you all know, for startups, there are only a few of them which will actually be able to succeed. There's a very high mortality rate. Where we see a lot of opportunity is actually solving solutions and bringing software into areas where there was no software at all before. So you saw in the previous presentation where Shankar was talking about, now you can actually have multilingual, you can have a UI which is voice enabled, you can actually have context which you can take from all these different places, which means that you can bring software into areas where it can never be, which was never previously used. So for example, a simple example is one of the startups had talked about helping companies fill out government RFPs. Right? I thought it was a very good example where the RFPs are like this thick. They're about 1,000 pages thick, right? So there was no software at all which was possible. So this is an example where you are actually bringing value, bringing new use cases, and then potentially unlocking opportunities. We should not dismiss the wrapper use case. I'm just pulling it out there because it's very easy to say, hey, look, this is a wrapper, that is a wrapper. Of course, this is going to get disintermediated. Now, by definition, a lot of startups are going to fail. But we should understand that the wrappers which are able to get the customer adoption from both the consumer side and on the enterprise side will have the benefit of increasing data, and hence they can create the moat. So right now they look completely indefensible, but the successful ones will actually be quite valuable a year or two from now. So I think that the criticism that this is all just some app which has been created is probably unjustified.
And if I may just ask a follow-up question regarding that. So Shripati, in your overall experience, have you seen successful startups in India working with the enterprise? Are they more towards traditional AI, ML technology areas? Or have you seen maybe Gen AI startups also being successful, at least in the initial run?
That's very interesting. What we find is that the folks who started before the Gen AI revolution are actually very well placed to create these solutions because they are familiar with both kinds of models. And as far as the user is concerned, they really don't care what is the underlying model that you are using. What they care is that their use case is getting solved. And it is not uncommon to find startups actually leverage different models underneath, where they want more deterministic output, it'll be more AI, more ML-based models, and where you actually need to do the user interface, which has an NLP, a natural language interface, you're obviously going to go with LLM route. So focusing on the use case and the problem you're solving is probably what's relevant. But to specifically answer your question, the insight which we have and have found just from talking to a lot of startups is that those who started earlier were actually working on ML models from 2018, 19, 20, and so forth, are supremely well placed now because they understand the nuances of how to implement these things.
Okay, wonderful. So in fact, India is home to, I think, more than 5,000, 6,000 odd AI startups just focusing on building AI for the country. So my next question is for Shashank. So in this landscape, which has more than 5,000, 6,000 odd AI startups, what are some real signals that you see whenever you interact with these startups? These signals which will actually convey the message that these startups are at least ready to work with enterprises. They have achieved product market fit.
So, we come in at a very early stage. We look at pre-seed and seed. Now, these are essentially founders building post-ideation, and they have a prototype, so to speak, right? So one of the key elements of evaluation is that can they move to a POC and paid POC and then build a use case within an enterprise? Sure. What we've seen is some of the founders they underestimate the life cycle of the sales process of getting implemented. So from a paid POC to actually generating revenue and then figuring the efficacy of that product at the enterprise level. I think that cycle is what we essentially are trying to shorten for our portfolio company. Now, while we are doing all of that, we are seeing a bunch of challenges which emerge and a bunch of success rates which happen with founders. One is a lot of enterprises are closed-ended. So they will want to partner with startups, but because there are some on-prem solutions at the enterprise level, and founders are building around cloud and ease of use, sometimes the correlation doesn't happen, right? So no matter what you're building in terms of, whether it's an industrial use case or, agentic workflows, right? It really boils down to what kind of cross-pollination of information is happening between the enterprise and the startup. And when we are evaluating companies at a pre-seed, where there's literally nothing, it's very fluid state. We're trying to, with our capital, we're trying to achieve a product market fit. We need to kind of consider all these avenues in terms of ensuring, okay, fine, if they have 2 enterprise customers, will they be able to replicate this model for 10, 15? Will this model work or will it fail flat? So I think when we are evaluating some of the trends, and we've invested in 180 companies from a previous fund, 50 of them in enterprise tech, at least 25% of those enterprise tech companies are not doing what we funded them for. They've pivoted. There are specific use cases which have been built across these enterprises, and they keep evolving. So there's a lot of trends are emerging, but I think the on-prem and cloud native, when founders are building on, I think remains a point where founders are not able to see through that challenge, which enterprises are not very open to kind of, work with founders who are not doing something on-prem.
Sure. Can we have a quick show of hands here? How many are startup founders or maybe from startups? Okay, a handful. I think there is some clear lesson for the startup founders and teams from startups. I think the enterprise world is an entirely different world, as Shashank was mentioning, that there are clearly considerations for startups whenever you have to work with enterprises. And these range from the sales cycle, these range from technology considerations. I think he was clearly talking about on-prem deployments for a lot of software companies, for a lot of AI companies. All of these have to be carefully considered before actually jumping onto the bandwagon. So thank you, Shashank, for that. Thank you, Shripati, for sharing that information. Now, I will switch sides and I will talk to the startup founders and see what they are up to. So I'll start with you, Himanshu. So tell us what you're doing and what do you think about the overall AI startup landscape in India?
Got it. Hope I'm audible. So firstly, if you talk about AI as a whole and AI out of India, I am long India, and I'm a firm believer that there will be highly impactful businesses that will be built out of Bangalore and India in general, and we will be building AI for the world. Now, you may obviously call me optimist, but that's how the founders are. But at the same time, we should also realize that we are in an AI war, and currently, from the looks of it, the US and China are obviously winning, and we Indian founders have to find a niche. Now, as an operator, I frequently meet a lot of people, a lot of AI builders and founders. And one key thing which I've noticed is that we have started dreaming big. We are building AI not only for just India, but for the world. So we are actually building out these solutions for the US market, for the Europe market, and even the APAC market for that matter. And it's only a matter of time that we will be able to see a lot of these valuable companies coming out in the AI space, similar to how we had the SaaS era, where the software as a service, and we saw the likes of the Freshworks and whatnot. I'm sure that we will see a similar range of AI startups coming out of it. Now, how do we make that happen? Well, obviously, there's a lot of investment needed internally from the VCs, which obviously is starting to happen. But at the same time, there is also the government support that needs to be done, whether it is in terms of infrastructure or in terms of ensuring that there are enough talent opportunities that are out there. So these are a few of the viewpoints which I have related to the AI in India.
So Himanshu, a quick follow-up on that. So tell the audience as to what exactly you are, what problem are you solving? So I think that could be a great thing for the audience.
Sure, yeah, maybe I should have started with that. So we are actually solving AI in the CPG industry. It's a vertical AI problem. And what essentially we do is we help the CPG companies around the globe to identify what next product to launch in the market. So we work with the likes of Nestle, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and we recommend them product insights using which they launch the real products in the market. And at the same time, we also provide them insights which they can use for marketing campaigns. So this is what we do. Now, again, the key point to note here is the verticalization part, and that's where I feel the Indian AI builders can make and find that niche. Because at the end of the day, you have a horizontal layer which is being dominated by the OpenAI and Google and whatnot. But then vertical AI is where I feel the Indian AI builders can make a huge difference. Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of enterprises which are operating in multiple industries, and we can leverage all of that knowledge base as well as the workflow knowledge to make that happen. So, yes.
Wonderful. Himanshu, I'll come back to you. I think you can share your journey of working with with enterprises. I think you're clearly working with CPG enterprises, right? So maybe later, maybe in the next segment, I will ask you questions about your journey as to what has been your experience. I will quickly turn to Madhav now. Madhav, what exactly are you working on, and what do you think about the overall let's say, AI landscape in India, and specifically, let's say, I think everybody's talking about AI for Bharat. So what views do you have on that?
So just to give everyone some context on my company, Vahan, we are building an AI recruiter for India's blue-collar workforce. Right? So India has over 500 to 600 million people in the blue-collar space. A large part of them today don't really have a very structured or organized way to find jobs. What we've built is a voice bot which talks to people in their language, today in English and Hindi, but we plan on adding at least 8 other major languages, Indian languages very, very soon. And it's able to match people with jobs based on their backgrounds. It's able to qualify them for particular jobs. And it's also able to collect basic information, PAN card, Aadhaar card, right, and get them onboarded onto jobs. Today, we work largely in the delivery space. I'm sure most people here are using quick commerce services like Zepto, Uber, or rather Blinkit, Swiggy, etc. So we work with all of these large companies. We now get upwards of 40,000 people employed every month in these companies. At the heart of what we've built, obviously, is this voice bot. But one layer deeper is a network of very, very small recruitment agencies that we've been able to aggregate across the country. India has lakhs and lakhs of recruitment agencies, which are more or less the default channel through which people find jobs today. And what we're doing is empowering these people with AI technology, and in this case, a voice bot, which enables them to do a lot more with lesser effort. So if a human recruiter working at one of these agencies, let's say, is able to recruit one person a day when they do it manually, When they use our AI recruiter, they can do up to 3 a day. And of course, when the technology becomes better, that 3 could become 5, could become 10, et cetera, in the future, right? So I think in India specifically, while we're seeing a lot of companies focus on enterprise use cases, selling largely abroad, less so in India, and we're seeing some people focus on consumer use cases in India, I'm not seeing a lot of companies focusing on large-scale Bharat-type use cases. And I think that's where the true differentiator can come from, or it's definitely one way to build differentiation in a business. Because those markets are not very sexy or obvious, and especially for large foundational model companies, right? I doubt that they will look at these markets anytime soon. So it's a good space to perhaps attack or build for. It's also something that is very messy, right? These markets are very messy. Data is all over the place. They're very manual, human-based. And building on what Shripati said, I think there is a sweet spot there where you can start to bring in software in a sense, though with AI software becomes invisible. You can start to bring in that style of software into very manual and human-based workflows and make them a lot more, not just efficient, but a lot more productive overall. So I think that's where the true value can lie for companies building for India.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Madhav, for that. In fact, before we move on to the next segment, I think this audience is a lovely audience, and it is keeping up with all the pressures. I think this is a session before lunch. Let us have a big round of applause for the audience here. Can we have some more energy, please? Okay, wonderful. So with this, we move on to the next segment, and we will try to understand some of the challenges that the startups face when they're working with enterprises in much more depth. I will first turn the attention to our VC friends. So in your experience, do you think that startups often underestimate the complexity of plugging into enterprise systems? Shashank, you alluded to that in your conversation earlier. And so do you think that that is a real problem right now, and all these startup founders need to be made aware of all of these challenges much before? And what kind of signals do you look for when you're judging an AI startup so that they are enterprise ready? Maybe Shripati, we could start from you.
Okay, I'll just keep it short. So I think that enterprises, especially if you're looking at targeting the US, the larger enterprises in the US, I think are an interesting ball game, because a lot of them are going to have about 7, 8, 10 pilots going on. So I'm not kidding. When we see startup slides, we'll see the same enterprise company, either in India or the US, in everybody's customer list, right? And I can understand that, because the enterprises are saying, hey, look, we'll just try out every single product out there, because everything is adding some value. And then we'll go and pick one, maybe two, to actually go and go forward with. So the difference here is that getting and converting that pilot to a production use case is like a critical issue. And there are two obstacles to that. One might be the maturity of the product itself, but the larger one is the maturity of the organization here, because the organization is also doing pilots, because if you're the CEO of an enterprise, the board is hammering on your head and saying, where is the AI strategy? So everyone wants to actually have something going on in AI. So unlike other technology transitions, where you would be trying to, as an entrepreneur, trying to push the technology in, here there's a pull for the technology. Outstanding. But there's a big gap between pilot and production. So it's one thing to understand, because just getting a pilot is absolutely no guarantee that you're going to get production. So that's one challenge you have to be careful. The second is that understanding the decision-making process within the enterprise, because you'll find some champions and a lot of antibodies to the thing which is being proposed. So for instance, if you're actually doing some kind of an infrastructure product, you can expect the IT team might not be exactly too enthused about it. It might or might not be a threat to the job, but it's definitely changing the user behavior or the workflow, which has previously been there. So I think there are a lot of, the role of go-to-market and the understanding of the domain is actually more important than the tech of AI itself, is what I would say, at least from the way I look at startups.
Wonderful. I think, Shripati, one point that you mentioned, that the startup founders actually need to understand the overall buyer ecosystem much better. Because right now, I think in my own previous experience as well, we have only interacted with maybe we were actually chasing the decision maker. We thought that maybe if the decision is coming from the top, then it would be easier. But actually getting access to the right decision maker is also very, very difficult. So sometimes you need to understand the overall ecosystem. You need to know and understand a lot many people in the buyer ecosystem.
Yeah, perhaps I'll make one other quick point here before handing over to Shashank, which is that one other big pitfall I see is that the startups are solving a problem,
Sure.
but it's not necessarily the problem.
Sure.
So there are 50 things which are wrong with an enterprise in which it potentially could be solved and the value could be added.
Sure.
But it's not top 3 for the CEO, CIO, CTO, and so forth. So what happens is that you will see that, hey, look, I'm providing all this value. Why is anybody not interested? Potentially, it's because it's just not a burning problem for the decision makers, the key decision makers.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. Shashank, would you like to add on to that question?
No, I echo his thoughts. I'll just go on the product side. What we've seen at our stage, pre-seed, seed, most of the founders end up overestimating the information they'll get from the enterprise to enhance their product, right? And they assume that the data being received by them is going to be automatically giving 100% output, which will be consumed by the enterprise. That doesn't happen. And then the whole efficacy of the product kind of diminishes, right?
Okay.
So this is more towards the founders in terms of, how can they determine the output of their product with, they estimate that, okay, if I've built one solution, if I get A to B data sets, I can go through to a TAM serviceable opportunity of 10 enterprises. Each enterprise will give data in a very siloed manner, and that impacts the product development sometimes, right? Founders sometimes, they're not able to capture that understanding from at least our vantage point at a pre-seed level. I think this factor, once you've kind of built out that solution which is replicable for a couple of enterprises, and then what exactly Shripati said, figuring out who's the go-to person, right? Which is a repeatable model. I think these are key elements which many founders kind of just overestimate, don't think through it, whether it's lack of experience or not having the right channel partner or somebody who can guide them through this entire process.
Sure, I think this, the point that you mentioned, Shashank, is also very important, because when the company is being built, when the product is being built, you speak to a lot of enterprises. There's this classic dilemma between whether you should standardize, limit it to maybe a certain scope, or when you speak to a lot of enterprises, as you are mentioning, there's a lot of information that gets shared with you, and then you want to actually add a lot of features. So there's this classic dilemma between limitation and standardization and expanding of the horizons. Okay, wonderful. So all these are very, very good learnings for the startup community, if you're listening to this. I will turn the attention to the startup founders and ask them about the journey that they have seen so far. So Himanshu, I'll start with you. So you are clearly working with a lot of enterprises, CPG enterprises. So tell us how your journey has been. If you could recollect your experience having worked with the first CPG startup, what kind of challenges did you face with them? How was your journey working with them? How did you get them onboarded?
Yeah, so just to give you maybe a quick bit of a background, so we are primarily in the enterprise AI SaaS space, which means that we are selling to the large enterprises, and often these come with a long sales cycle process. Now, one of the big challenges with any enterprise that you will face is they will not sign up for a multi-million-dollar deal straight up. You will have to prove your value, and typically that happens using pilots. Now, and one of the things which I have seen a lot of founders that make mistake is they go for the free pilot, which I would definitely advise against. You should always go for a paid pilot or a paid POC, because at the end of the day, the other side also needs to have a certain stake, whether it is in terms of the time and the money and effort and whatnot. So that was one of the things that was very clear for AI pilot from the very beginning, that we will only do paid pilots and no free pilots at all. And that is always a challenge in Indian enterprises, but somehow we navigated. So that was one. The second challenge which we actually encountered was, and that also happened through a lot of failures, which is that we did not have a success criteria of the pilot. Because a lot of time what happens is you might do a pilot, but then what is the actual success criteria on the basis of which you can say this pilot is successful or not. So having those metrics being predetermined actually makes it a lot more easier when you are tomorrow having the discussion on conversion from pilot to a larger contract. So this was again, we learned it the hard way when some of our pilots did not close, and we started putting out these metrics in the very beginning only to ensure that we are essentially seeing the success of the pilot, and we are able to evaluate that pilot criteria very, very easily. So these were a couple of learnings for us.
Okay, great, thank you. So Madhav, what have been your learnings? In your experience, what are some of the classic challenges that startups face while working with enterprises, especially when they have to move from pilots to production?
Yeah, no, I echo what everyone else on the panel has said, and I'll build on top of this. There's an analogy that I've heard of that works well for me in this space. Your use case or your implementation could either help drive efficiency, or it could help drive productivity. There's a nuance, right? So the original analogy is skinny versus strong use case. So are you helping the enterprise, your customer, become skinny, which is more efficient perhaps? Or are you helping them become stronger, which is more productive? Are they generating more top line, more revenue, right? And I think it's very important to understand exactly where your value lies in that spectrum. And then, of course, align yourself with what the organization wants to do. Most enterprises in India, and this has been my experience, because cost of labor, etc., is low, want to implement software that helps them drive more revenue, more top line. Efficiency is more something that works in the West, which is why traditionally software sales and SaaS has been more successful in the West. So specifically for people building in India, I would recommend that you focus on implementations that can actually drive top line. That will hopefully drive more success for you.
Sure. In fact, that is what Shripati was also referring to. There are these burning projects that every CIO, CTO, CDO would have. Working on top line is definitely one amongst them, definitely.
I'll just add
Sure.
maybe one more point, because this again came through multiple no's that we heard during this entire process, which is that always go for the early adopters when you're obviously going out for the enterprise sales, because not everyone is going to be an early adopter. So you will hear multiple no's, but you need to identify those customers which are willing to try out an imperfect product in the very beginning. And it's a very hard process. You might hear, it's the same process as a VC, right? You might speak to 100 of them, 99 might say no, but then one yes is going to make all the difference. So that's another learning that has been for us.
Okay, great. So I think both of you actually also need to consider the overall issue of trust security, especially when you're working with enterprises, right? So how did you deal with that? So this is a question for both of you. Maybe one, Himanshu, you could.
Sure. I mean, in enterprise, obviously, trust is very, very and extremely important. And the way to think about it is in two parts, right? One is the security aspect, the data security aspect that you talked about. The second is also in terms of the viability of the business itself. Now, let me cover both the points. The second one maybe to begin with, which is the viability. Now, when we closed our first enterprise deal, the customer question was, how do I know whether you are going to be around for next 2 years, right? Because at the end of the day, every fundraise that you do is for a runway of 18 months. And the enterprises are looking at a longer time horizon. They're looking for 5 to 10 years of commitment and whatnot. So that was one of the questions, and obviously then we went back to the whiteboard and started thinking on how do we do it. There are ways in which you fake it till you make it, that's one. But even aside of that, the idea is how do you start involving them in the longer term product roadmap. So we started showcasing a short to the medium to the long term, and the long term would be anywhere like 5 to 10 year time of a product roadmap. And we also started including some of these customers in the customer advisory board, which also started making them feel a part of this larger and the longer journey. So that has been one of the learning for us, that you always have to show them a long-term vision and work with them to showcase that roadmap and where they feel that yes, this company is going to be there. At the same time, of course, whenever you are having, whether it is fundraising or you are growing in terms of your business, you also communicate that transparently so that the customer knows that, okay, you are doing well, right? So that's the first part in terms of addressing the viability. Secondly, now coming to the security, and again, because we deal in big data, there's tons of data that we work on, and you have to ensure that you're not running into any compliance issues or security related issues. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can do it. The first, the easiest one is actually the certification. You can go for the different certifications which are out there, whether it is ISO 27 or whether it is SOC 2 Type 2 or GDPR. And this is something which we quickly got to know once we closed our first enterprise deal, that we will need these certifications, especially the SOC 2 Type 2 if you are trying to operate in the US market. And by getting these certifications, then the conversations becomes a lot more easier, because all of these enterprises, they will have a certain checklist. And in that checklist, if you have these certifications, then the process becomes a lot more easier. So that has been the second learning, that go for the different certifications, signal to them transparently which are the kind of models you are using, how much open source is there, how much closed source is there, and this is something which happens during the IT evaluation process, and you have to obviously give them that confidence. So these have been the couple of learnings for us in data security space.
Okay, great. So Madhav, would you like to just add into that?
Again, I'll echo what he said in terms of just focusing on the basics, ensuring you have the right certifications in place. SOC 2 is very standard when you sell in the US, ISO perhaps more in India. The DPDP Act is coming, it's sort of around the corner, so ensuring that your systems are built in compliance with the provisions of the Act, etc. One other thing that I'd like to add, though, is that there are now a lot of enterprise-grade third-party data systems that softwares can actually buy instead of obviously building internally, which sometimes then shortens your build cycle. Maybe not the amount of money you will spend, but it helps you get to market faster. So in fact, there's a company called Skyflow, I think they're exhibiting here as well. Enterprise-grade data security or data sort of storage provider with, of course, enterprise-grade security. So I think that's always a good option for startups that are especially early in their journey, where you can perhaps subscribe to these third-party services, right, and get to market faster.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Madhav. Shashank, I'll come to you. So I think one of the key factors in startup success is how they engage and partner with enterprises. So in your experience of having worked with a lot of startups in the country, what are the most dominant and most effective partnership models with enterprises?
Yeah, so just building on Madhav's point, I think he just touched upon that. What we've seen is aggressive selling mindset needs to be there to begin with at the founder level. Now, in enterprise, I think we've, over the last 10 years, Shripati can add also, there are models which work and there are models which don't work. Right? Now, the best way, what we figured out is, if it's a new startup with a new product, it's somewhat difficult to just walk into an enterprise and pitch your product and expect that the sale will close. Right? The partnership model with larger enterprises like a Google or a HP through their accelerator programs and a bunch of these programs which happen are interesting way to collaborate, because you are then also being asked to use the credits, which is a function of the program, but also you get access to their client bases, right? Sure. The third, which we also focus on in terms of some of the enterprise solutions is, there are a lot of these SIs who work with larger enterprises like an HP or a Google, right? And they've been, without the founder choosing to walk a path of white labeling their solution, if they can maintain the brand and they can partner with these SIs who have enough distribution, sure, right? I think those kind of initiatives will help you at least from a pre-seed to a seed level and determining the efficacy of the product or pushing it as a bundled solution, but still not becoming a white label solution. I think these kind of initiatives are important. So in 3 segments, you can choose to walk into an enterprise, start doing that, but then you will face the challenges. What's your roadmap? Do you have the defensibility and ability to continue delivering the solution in 5 years' time, or will you just like close shop? And that's sometimes a very difficult question to answer. Second is partnership with larger enterprises. Today, almost every large enterprise has that program. Third is also, which I personally feel startups don't engage a lot often in a deeper manner, is SI integration and figuring out a mechanism over there in terms of figuring out a GTM and distribution.
That is easier said than done, Shashank. Okay, great. So, so I have a question for both of you. So if you look at the overall AI startups, what convinces you that an AI startup has the resilience to last maybe 5-10 years in a space? And this is a space which is very exciting. The intensity of competition in this space is actually very, very high. And there's a lot of competition from big tech as well, especially after the onset, especially after the advent of Gen AI, and now we are looking at agentic AI. I think there are lots of stories about disruption of a lot of startups, right? Especially at the use case layer. So how do you sense that this startup has maybe the resilience to last 5-10 years? A question to both of you. Shripati, if you could start.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's a hard question because we are in the business of evaluating people. and people are incredibly complex, right? So we make our mistakes and in sometimes not supporting founders who are extraordinarily good. We just didn't figure it out. So it happens. What I see is that it is not really, again, about the technology. It's about the learning quotient, which is how quickly are you looking at the changing landscape and then adopting your solution to address that. Honestly, whether it is, which particular model which is being used, reasoning models, inference time reasoning, agentic, etc., are all means to an end. So what we are looking for is, as a team, not just an individual, as a team, are you really understanding the customer problem which you're trying to solve? How passionate you are about that, the mission behind doing it? Because it's easier said when you're starting a company that's it's an 8-10 year journey. It's much harder to actually pull it off. And so folks who actually both are missionary about the problem they're trying to solve, have a deep understanding of the domain in which they're doing, and have a high learning quotient will probably be the ones which I feel last, because the technology, it's very hard, even if Sam Altman were to come here and sit about what it's going to look like 2 years from now. So I don't even try to predict that.
Wonderful. Any quick comments, Shashank? You echo those.
Shripati is kind of built on it, and I think it's
Sure.
I
Great,
agree
thank
with
you.
him.
Thank you. So one final question to both of you. How do you assure the investors are here, how do you assure the investors as well as the enterprises that you're ready for the big game? Maybe, Madhav, you can.
So I think one of the very important questions, obviously what Shripati said is critical, the people who are involved in the business. But beyond that, in terms of what you're picking to build in the AI space, I think there are two things that are important there. One, try to pick a space where you can perhaps leverage a very unique data set. So we're approaching AGI perhaps in the next 5 years or so. And AGI will be very, very capable and will do a lot of different things. And so the question is, how do we differentiate as startups, and how do we stand the test of the next decade or two over time? And I think that can be done by trying to be in a space where there's a possibility of acquiring a very unique data set through which you can fine-tune or train these models and make them capable for that particular use case. So in our case, for example, we're building this AI recruiter. We have hundreds of thousands of hours of call recordings between human recruiters and candidates in multiple Indian languages. And so we mine that data set to make our AI recruiter better. And again, that's a very, very unique place to be. I don't see many other companies in that space, and I don't see the big labs getting into that space anytime soon. So that's one. And of course, context and distribution is fundamental. Right? If you're able to get distribution, get deep with enterprises or whatever your customer segment is, that is something that's always going to be hard to replicate, or at least that's what I believe.
Wonderful. Just quick comment from you, Himanshu, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A.
Yeah, I would just build on top of that only. The proprietariness of the data is extremely important, and also the workflow, right? How you are able to integrate that workflow in that application layer, because at the end of the day, the foundational models are going to be what they are already. You cannot be, getting into that space is obviously very, very difficult unless you have tons of money. So, but getting into an application space is relatively easier because you are looking at a proprietary data, you're looking at a workflow automation and all of that. For example, we have very unique insights from the proprietary data of food and beauty. For example, I can tell you in Brazil beverage, in coffee, how much pairing is between strawberry and blueberry. So that's a unique insight which I will have, which you cannot get from, let's say, a platform like ChatGPT or a foundational model. So these are the proprietariness that you have to build using the application layer, and this is the differentiation as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.